Greetings and welcome to the fourth international webinar on AI, machine learning, and data science and robotics. I'm very delighted to be speaking with you today on reshaping the shape of time, integrating large language models and extended reality for enhanced cultural heritage representation. I'm Dr. James Hudson from Lindenwood University, and I'm excited to share our findings with you. Now, before beginning, we need to discuss what we're talking about in the intersection between generative AI, natural language processing, and extended reality as it relates to cultural heritage. Obviously, natural language processing is not new. It has been around and integrated into our lives for decades now. And on a daily basis, we are either going to be talking to Siri or Alexa or dictating texts, right, while we're moving between meetings. All these things are not new, but how we can now use them is new. In addition to that, or likewise, we should state that extended reality, XR, virtual reality, augmented reality, and mixed reality are also not new. We have had these technologies, going back to the 90s in education, but now we can be putting all of these together to work in tandem to a better understanding of different types of cultures around the world if we are going to follow a few important restrictions, steps, and considerations. Now, immersive learning, we already know is going to be very impactful for engaging students for the active learning that it represents, the ability to retain information, engaging with different things. It provides a longer lasting sense of learning and experience for the learner themselves. But it also facilitates these dialogical interactions, conversations with different cultural narratives. Generally, we have one dominant narrative throughout history that was invented, of course, by the Greeks and handed down from a Western perspective. And so the way in which history is taught, that being focusing on vital statistics, major events such as battles, different coronations of rulers, and the rise and fall of nations, right? This is how we have categorized history. But there are other elements of history we have overlooked for generations. And thanks to new multisensory feedback such as haptics and olfactory VR, being able to smell where you are at, we have new immersive ways in order to tell these stories. And we can tell different types of stories now. Now, what we can do with the latest generation of large language models that we've seen over the past year since the stable release of ChatGPT by OpenAI last November 2022 is that we have the ability to take a massive amount of information and categorize it, classify it, and output it. We can converse with this data. Now, what this means is if we have enough primary source material from individuals, we can actually converse with them. Therefore, we have the ability to talk to, not just passively read, ingest, and or analyze what a particular culture or person said, but have a conversation with them to understand better. So this gives us the ability to capture and record many indigenous civilizations that are going extinct, right? The thousands of languages that are not English that will go extinct by the end of the century. We can preserve these in this way, thus challenging these mainstream historical narratives, specifically Eurocentric narratives of the dominance of the West, of globalism, which is often referred to as Americanization. Now, in doing so, what we can do is think about this from a scaffolded learning in virtual environments, or VEs, or VLEs, virtual learning environments. So what this means is we can think about moving from before the experience, during the experience, and then reflecting after the experience. But during the experience, we have the ability now to interact with and explore historical events and figures. So for instance, in the very near future, we'll be able to bring together these disparate technologies. One, through virtual reality, which allows us to engage physically in an immersive space and experience. And then two, through the textual and computational abilities of large language models to converse and have a dialogical experience with these different historical figures. Therefore, we will be able to move back into any point in time, go down street level talk to individuals and see what things were like, and even record local dialects and these regional variations, right, of speech, intonation, right, and these other very important cultural markers. Now, in order to do this, we of course need to address the elephant in the room, and that's going to be addressing the accuracy and ethical implications of AI representations. So what this means is, through the older versions of large language models, because of how they are functioning as generative pre-trained transformers, they would often hallucinate answers in order to give you what you asked for, which means that it very often would make up facts that were incorrect. And so this is why we need experts in order to verify the historical veracity of the output, retrain it, right, to go through and correct it, nudge it in the right direction as we're going to be engaging with these personalities. Just this morning, I was recreating the founder of Lindenwood University, who founded the university in 1832, and much of what was output was not necessarily factually correct. So I had to go in and retrain it, give it the correct information and historical data to be pulling from. And this is what you need, are those individuals who have this expertise. But it also leads to the next question. Most historians still come from the West. Most history is still written from a Western perspective. Therefore, we need to be mindful of the notion of cultural appropriation. So the idea of, once again, if we're going to be recreating, as we're doing in another project, right, the culture, the history, the people of Burundi in Africa, right, how do we do so in a culturally appropriate way, right, especially because much of the documentation is lacking. So we need these strategies working in tandem with those that are among that culture to make sure that, number one, the data privacy is, of course, going to be understood and carried through. The legalities are going to be considered. Digital repatriation, also a major consideration, but also that the output is reflective of their worldview and of the culture itself. Which leads to another often overlooked approach in history, and that's going to be ecological momentary assessment, as well as geomapping. The idea that where a particular record came from is as important as the person that wrote it and the point in time in which it was located. So for instance, in geomapping, we look at where the documents were produced, stored, where they took place, their life cycle in transit, etc. And this leads us to Kubler's The Shape of Time dilemma, in that we have fictionalized this notion of a global narrative and time itself into a linear kind of model in which there are a set of facts, dates, and events that are going to unfold predictably. But this one line and linear approach does not account for the constellation, if you will, of various histories that are occurring simultaneously, right? And so therefore we need to rethink the shape of time in order to have a better understanding of our place in it. So that's why this new perspective of including ecological momentary assessment, EMA, and geomapping is important to rethink this new space-time continuum. Now, this leads us to the transformative potential of merging these technologies with large language models, along with XR or immersive technologies. What you have the ability to do is create very immersive, very captivating educational experiences, whereas 10 years ago, if we're going to recreate ancient Rome or Egypt, the pixelization and or the level of detail and realism and verism was quite limited. It looked very cartoonish in many ways because of the limited amount of polygons we could render and move through without the lag time that would make one sick, via VR sickness. But now we can model and render at the moment. It's going to be generating, not rendering here very soon, billions of polygons in real time. And this was over a year ago. So we are moving into the next level now with the latest hardware technology, and you want to follow NVIDIA for that. But we find that we want to balance these historical dialogues with postmodern simulacra. What that means is we need to fill in as much information as possible, gather all the primary source data, not just the vital statistics of birth, death, wedding, ownership of property, but also those mundane experiences such as letters, condolence letters, birthday cards, voting records, what you bought at the general store. These things flesh out the minutia of daily life, which then lets us aggregate the data and have a much more holistic view and a more correct view of daily life. Even if certain parts of the data are missing, we can aggregate it if we have millions of other variables to work from in these parameters. Therefore, we can fill in what someone's dialect may have sounded like, or specifically parts of their lives based upon what we know of other experiences that are similar at the time. Therefore, in looking forward in the future outlook of what we discussed, we want to think about bringing together, which has not been discussed at length. We're doing quite a bit of research on digital resurrection, otherwise known as digital necromancy, of how do we bring historical figures back? What are the considerations? What do we need, right? So obviously right now it is very easy. You can go on sites like HeyGen, upload a 2-minute video of yourself talking, and you'll have an AI clone that was going to be animated for you, right? That works well if we have video footage of individuals. We can also take photographic representation, animate it, couple that with a few seconds of audio, and then we can then also animate. It takes a bit more, but we can do it. But then the question becomes, what about historical figures that existed before the phonograph, before the daguerreotype, right? In which we only have secondary records like drawings, paintings, right? Other type of human-made elements that are subjective in how they're going to be carried out for various geopolitical reasons and socioeconomic reasons. And so we have to consider what type of information we would need and set up this type of framework. And so for more on that, see our research on cultural heritage and digital necromancy and bringing back these type of records, merging them with what we're looking at here. For more information, you can go to Digital Commons and Lindenwood Library's website, our institutional repository. We have many studies, dozens and dozens, on AI and XR and how to bring these figures back and the considerations and limitations of doing so. You can reach out to me directly at James Hudson or jhudson@lindenwood.edu, or you can call me at 636-949-4863. Enjoy the rest of the conference.